The torchlight flickered nervously against the damp stone walls as the group of adventurers crept into the entrance of the infamous dungeon. They moved with the cautious precision of those expecting danger at every turn, weapons half-drawn and senses on high alert. Lyra, a lithe elven ranger, took point. Her keen eyes scanned the passageway ahead, searching for trip wires or pressure plates. Behind her, Garrick the human paladin kept his shield at the ready, prepared to defend against any sudden attacks. Finn, a wiry halfling rogue, brought up the rear, ensuring nothing sneaked up on them from behind. "I don't like this," Garrick muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too quiet. Where are all the monsters?" Finn nodded in agreement. And where's all the gold? I was promised untold riches, not an abandoned cave system." Lyra held up a hand for silence, her head tilted, as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. "There's life here," she said slowly, "but it's not what I expected. The air feels different. Almost peaceful." As they rounded a corner, the narrow passageway opened into a vast cavern that took their breath away. Instead of the dank, oppressive darkness they'd anticipated, they found themselves in an underground oasis. Bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, ethereal glow over everything. Crystal-clear streams trickled through the room, and lush moss carpeted the floor. Strangest of all, they could hear what sounded like distant conversation and laughter. What in the nine hells?" Garrick breathed, lowering his shield in confusion. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the cavern. "Welcome, surface dwellers, to our sanctuary." The adventurers spun around, weapons raised, to face the source of the voice. What they saw made their jaws drop in a mixture of awe and terror. Before them stood a creature unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It had the general shape of a massive stag, but its body was a patchwork of scales, fur, and chitinous plates. Wickedly curved horns sprouted from its head, and its eyes glowed with an inner light that spoke of ancient power and deep sorrow. Lyra nocked an arrow, her aim unwavering despite her shock. "What manner of beast are you?" she demanded. The creature raised its clawed hands in a gesture of peace. "I am Thicket," it said, its voice surprisingly gentle for its fearsome appearance. "Once guardian of the Whispering Woods, then a cursed prisoner of this dungeon, and now something in between." Finn, his curiosity overcoming his fear, took a step forward. "You're not attacking us," he observed. "Why?" Thicket's massive shoulders seemed to sag slightly. "Because we are no longer the monsters you came here expecting to find. We've broken free of the Sorcerer's direct control, though his curse still lingers." Over the next hour, as the adventurers slowly lowered their weapons, Thicket shared the incredible tale of the dungeon's transformation. He spoke of centuries of torment, of the Sorcerer's cruel manipulations, and of the recent rebellion that had granted them a measure of freedom. Other former monsters emerged as Thicket talked. Grimclaw the goblin chieftain, his eyes sharp with intelligence. Whisper the wraith, her ethereal form flickering with barely contained emotions. Even Skitter the rat man made an appearance, earning a yelp of surprise from Finn. As Thicket's story concluded, the adventurers exchanged bewildered looks. This was far from the straightforward dungeon crawl they'd anticipated. Garrick, ever the voice of skepticism, spoke up. "This is a lot to take in. But why tell us all this? Surely you must know we came here seeking treasure." A low, rumbling chuckle escaped Thicket. "Ah, yes, the Sorcerer's hoard. It still exists, you know. Vast beyond imagining, filled with artifacts of incredible power and gold beyond measure." Lyra's eyes narrowed. But it lies within the Sorcerer's personal lair, far from here," Thicket explained. "A place we cannot reach alone, for his power there is still too great." Understanding dawned on Finn's face. "You want our help," he said, a sly grin spreading across his features. "You're proposing an alliance?" Thicket nodded solemnly. "Indeed. Help us defeat the Sorcerer once and for all. Help us break this curse entirely. In return, you'll have a share of his treasure greater than you ever dreamed possible." The adventurers huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The offer was tempting, but the risks were enormous. Could they trust these former monsters? Was the potential reward worth the danger? Finally, Lyra stepped forward, her expression resolved. "We're in," she declared. but we'll need more than just the three of us. Allow us to return to the surface and gather more allies. If we're to face a sorcerer in his lair, we'll need an army." Thicket's eyes seemed to glow brighter with hope. "Agreed," he rumbled. "Return with your allies. We shall prepare for war." As the adventurers turned to leave, already discussing who they might recruit, Finn paused. He looked back at the assembled former monsters, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he mused, "this might just be the start of the greatest adventure ever told." Thicket watched them go, feeling a mixture of hope and trepidation. The die was cast. Word spread like wildfire through the taverns, marketplaces, and adventurers' guilds of the surface world. Tales of a transformed dungeon, reformed monsters, and the promise of unimaginable riches drew all manner of individuals to the once-dreaded cavern entrance. Lyra, Garrick, and Finn stood at the mouth of the cave, watching as a motley crew of surface dwellers arrived. Some came with gleaming armor and sharp blades, eager for glory. Others shuffled in with tattered robes and ancient tomes, seeking arcane knowledge. A few arrived with little more than the clothes on their backs and a desperate gleam in their eyes, hoping for a chance to change their fortunes. "Quite the crowd we've drawn," Finn mused, eyeing a group of dwarven miners lugging heavy equipment. Garrick nodded, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "Let's just hope they're prepared for what awaits them below." As the newcomers gathered, Thicket emerged from the cave, his imposing form causing a ripple of gasps and murmurs through the crowd. The former monster's eyes scanned the assembled group, a flicker of hope visible in their otherworldly glow. "Welcome," all Thicket's deep voice rumbled. "You stand at the threshold of a great adventure, one that will test not just your strength and skill, but your ability to look beyond appearances and forge unlikely alliances." Over the next few days, the transformed dungeon became a hive of activity as surface dwellers and former monsters worked to integrate their forces. The challenges were numerous, with trust being the most significant hurdle. In one cavern, Grimclaw the goblin chieftain faced off against a grizzled human warrior, their faces inches apart in a heated argument. "You expect me to trust my back to a goblin?" the warrior spat. "I've spent half my life defending villages from your kind." Grimclaw's eyes narrowed. "And I've spent centuries under a curse that forced me to be the monster you think I am. We've both got a lot to unlearn, don't we?" Nearby, Lyra intervened, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "Enough. We're all here for the same purpose. Our differences are our strength, not our weakness." Slowly, warily, Grimclaw and the warrior backed down. It was a scene repeated throughout the dungeon as old prejudices clashed with the need for cooperation. But for every conflict, there were moments of unexpected camaraderie. In a secluded alcove, Finn found himself engrossed in conversation with a group of former dungeon denizens, swapping tales of daring heists and narrow escapes. Wait, Finn chuckled, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "You're telling me you managed to steal the sorcerer's favorite chalice right from under his nose?" Skitter the rat man puffed up with pride. "Sure did. Course, the curse made me give it back, but for a moment there, I was the greatest thief in the underworld." As days turned to weeks, training grounds were established throughout the dungeon's vast network of caverns. The sound of clashing steel echoed through chambers where former monsters taught surface dwellers about the unique dangers they might face in the sorcerer's lair. In one large grotto, Whisper the Wraith hovered before a group of wide-eyed mages. "The sorcerer's powers draw heavily from the realm of shadows," her ethereal voice explained. "You must learn to perceive beyond the physical if you hope to counter his magic." Meanwhile, seasoned adventurers shared combat techniques and strategies with their monstrous allies. Garrick found himself instructing a group of trolls and ogres in the art of shield walls, while Lyra worked with a mixed group of elves, goblins, and other keen-eyed creatures to form a corps of scouts and archers. One evening, as the leaders gathered to discuss their progress, Thicket made an exciting announcement. "Whisper has discovered she can extend her scouting abilities far beyond what we imagined. She can pass through solid rock, potentially allowing us to gather intelligence on the sorcerer's defenses." The news was met with enthusiasm, but also raised new questions about the nature of their allies' changing abilities. Were they truly breaking free of the curse, or was this all part of some larger, inscrutable plan? As the day of their march drew near, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. What had begun as a disorganized collection of individuals with competing motivations had grown into something resembling a real army. They were united in purpose, if not yet entirely in trust. On the eve of their departure, Thicket addressed the assembled forces. His voice carried through the vast central cavern, reaching every ear. Tomorrow we set out to face our greatest challenge. The Sorcerer will throw everything he has at us. We will face dangers both physical and magical, and our resolve will be tested. But look around you. See the strength we have forged together, the unlikely bonds we have created. It is that unity, that willingness to see beyond our differences, that will carry us to victory. A cheer went up from the crowd, a cacophony of human voices mingling with monstrous roars and otherworldly sounds. As the noise faded, replaced by the busy sounds of final preparations, Thicket turned to Lyra, Garrick, and Finn. "Thank you," he said softly. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." Lyra smiled, placing a hand on Thicket's massive shoulder. "We're all in this together now. Whatever comes, we face it as one." As night fell on the transformed dungeon, an army like no other prepared for sleep. Humans bedded down next to reformed monsters, dwarves shared rations with goblins, and mages of all species compared notes on spells. Tomorrow would bring challenges and dangers, but for now, there was a shared sense of purpose and the first fragile tendrils of true camaraderie. The march to the Sorcerer's lair loomed, and with it, the promise of either glorious victory or catastrophic defeat. But one thing was certain: this unlikely alliance had already achieved something remarkable, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable mere weeks ago. The diverse army set out at dawn, their path illuminated by an eerie mixture of bioluminescent fungi and magical lights. Thicket took the lead, his massive form a beacon of determination. Flanking him were Lyra, her keen elven eyes scanning for danger, and Garrick, his armor gleaming with holy sigils of protection. As they ventured deeper into unexplored territories of the vast dungeon network, the transformed areas gave way to darker, more ominous passages. The air grew thick with an oppressive magic that set everyone on edge. "Something's not right," Grimclaw muttered, his goblin senses twitching. The stones themselves seemed to whisper warnings. No sooner had he spoken than the passage ahead shimmered and warped. The floor simply vanished, revealing a chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity. Otherworldly whispers echoed from its depths, promising both doom and temptation. Finn, who had been scouting ahead, skidded to a stop at the edge. "By all the gods," he breathed, peering into the abyss. "What manner of devilry is this?" Thicket's eyes narrowed as he studied the chasm. This is no natural formation. The Sorcerer has begun to draw power from other realms. This pit likely leads to some shadow dimension. As the army halted at the edge of this unexpected obstacle, the air around them began to thicken and coalesce. Shadows gathered, twisting into grotesque shapes that were part darkness, part flesh. Eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as the shadow creatures took form. "Defensive positions," Garrick bellowed, raising his shield as the first wave of shadow beasts attacked. The battle was chaotic and disorienting. Traditional weapons passed through some of the creatures harmlessly, while others proved vulnerable to steel. The mages in their ranks frantically leafed through spellbooks, searching for incantations that might prove effective against these otherworldly foes. Whisper the Wraith proved invaluable, her ethereal form able to disrupt the shadow creature's cohesion. "They're not fully of this world," she called out. Light and positive energy seemed to harm them most. Taking the cue, Garrick channeled divine energy through his sword, the blade bursting into radiant light. Each swing dispersed clusters of shadow beasts, buying time for the rest of the army to regroup and adapt their tactics. Lyra coordinated the archers, having them affix small magical lights to their arrows. "Aim for their eyes," she commanded. The air filled with streaks of light as enchanted arrows found their marks, causing shadow beasts to shriek and dissolve. In the midst of the fray, Thicket fought with primal fury, his antlers glowing with an inner light that repelled the shadows. Yet even as he battled, he felt a disturbing resonance with these creatures. The curse within him stirred, recognizing a kindred darkness. As the tide of battle began to turn in their favor, a bone-chilling roar echoed from the chasm. A massive tentacle of pure shadow lashed out, wrapping around several fighters and dragging them towards the pit. No Thicket bellowed, charging towards the edge. but he knew he wouldn't make it in time. It was Lurch, the reformed troll, who acted fastest. With a bellow of his own, he grabbed the shadow tentacle, his immense strength halting its retreat. "Go," he shouted to the ensnared fighters. "I'll hold it." One by one, the captured allies cut themselves free, scrambling to safety, but the tentacle's grip on Lurch tightened, pulling him ever closer to the chasm's edge. Grimclaw and Finn rushed to help, but Lurch shook his head. "Too late for me," he grunted. "But I go on my own terms." For freedom, with a final roar of defiance, Lurch hurled himself into the pit, taking the shadow entity with him. A moment of stunned silence fell over the battlefield as Lurch's sacrifice registered. Then, with renewed determination, the army rallied, driving back the remaining shadow beasts. But as the last of the creatures dissipated, the chasm itself began to close, the unnatural rift sealing as if it had never existed. The army regrouped, tending to their wounded and taking stock of their losses. Thicket approached the spot where Lurch had fallen, his head bowed in respect. "He was the best of us," he rumbled. "A true example of how we can change, how we can choose to be more than what the curse made us." Lyra placed a comforting hand on Thicket's flank. "His sacrifice won't be in vain. We'll make sure of it." As the army prepared to press on, there was a newfound gravity to their mission. They had faced their first true test and emerged victorious, but at a cost. The bonds between former monsters and surface dwellers, forged in the heat of battle, were stronger now. They were no longer separate factions, but a unified force. Garrick addressed the troops, his voice carrying authority and compassion. "What we faced here was but a taste of what's to come. The Sorcerer has indeed made pacts with dark powers, expanding his influence, but remember this: where there is shadow, there must also be light, and we carry that light within us, in our unity, in our determination to right the wrongs of the past." As they moved deeper into hostile territory, the army remained vigilant, knowing that each step brought them closer to their ultimate confrontation with the Sorcerer. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they marched on, their resolve hardened by the trials they had faced and the sacrifices of their comrades. Thicket, leading the way once more, felt the weight of leadership heavy upon him. The stirring of the curse during the battle had shaken him, a reminder of the darkness he still carried within. But looking back at the determined faces of his allies, monster and human alike, he found strength. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The Sorcerer's lair awaited, and with it, the final battle that would determine the fate of not just the dungeon, but perhaps the entire realm. The perilous march continued, each step bringing them closer to destiny. The army's advance slowed as they delved deeper into the Sorcerer's domain. The very air seemed to resist their progress, thick with malevolent magic that clung to them like a second skin. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, always just out of reach, watching and waiting. Thicket led the way, his massive form cutting a path through the gloom. But with each step, he felt the pull of the curse strengthening. Dark whispers tugged at the edges of his mind, urging him to give in, to embrace the monster he once was. Thicket, Lyra's voice cut through his inner turmoil. "Are you all right?" He shook his massive head, trying to clear it. The Sorcerer's influence grows stronger here. We must be vigilant, all of us. Garrick nodded grimly. "I feel it too. A darkness pressing against my holy wards. Whatever we're walking into, it's unlike anything we've faced before." As if in response to their words, the shadows around them surged into motion. Inky tendrils lashed out, separating the army into smaller groups. Panic spread as allies found themselves cut off from one another, fighting back to back against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. "Stand firm," Thicket roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Remember your training. Light and unity are our strengths." In one section of the battle, Finn found himself surrounded by shadow beasts, their red eyes gleaming with hunger. But just as they closed in, Grimclaw appeared at his side, a stolen magical artifact glowing in his hands. "Thought you could use a hand," Short-Stuff the Goblin grinned, activating the artifact and sending out a pulse of light that drove the shadows back. Finn laughed, despite the dire situation. "I had it under control. But thanks all the same, old friend." Across the battlefield, Whisper glided through the fray, her ethereal form disrupting the shadow creatures wherever she passed. She called out warnings and tactical advice, her scouting abilities proving invaluable in the chaotic melee. For hours, the battle raged. The army fought with everything they had, their unlikely brotherhood forged in combat growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Slowly, they began to push back the tide of darkness, regrouping and reclaiming lost ground. As the last of the shadow beasts dissipated, a moment of eerie calm settled over the battered army, but their relief was short-lived. A scream of betrayal cut through the air. All eyes turned to see one of the human mages, a quiet man who had joined them from a surface village, standing with hands raised in mystic gesture. Around him, a vortex of dark energy swirled. "Fool," he cackled, his voice distorted and inhuman. "Did you really think the sorcerer would leave his lair unguarded? I've been his eyes and ears from the beginning." Before anyone could react, the traitor unleashed a blast of shadow magic. Thicket, caught off guard, took the full brunt of the attack. He roared in pain as the curse within him resonated with the dark energy, threatening to overwhelm his hard-won self-control. Thicket Lyra cried out, nocking an arrow and taking aim at the traitor, but it was Garrick who reached him first, his holy sword cleaving through the vortex of shadows. The spy's eyes widened in shock as the paladin's blade found its mark. This isn't over," he gasped. "The sorcerer, he's made deals you can't even imagine. All the powers of the underworld stand with him." With a final, chilling laugh, the traitor dissolved into shadows, leaving the army shaken and on edge. In the aftermath, they regrouped once more, tending to wounds and taking stock of their losses. The revelation of a spy in their midst had sown seeds of doubt and paranoia. Trust, so carefully built over their journey, now felt fragile. Thicket, still reeling from the magical attack, addressed the army. His voice was strained but determined. "We've been dealt a blow, yes, but look at how far we've come. We've faced horrors beyond imagination and stood strong. We've forged bonds that transcend old hatreds. One traitor cannot undo all that we've accomplished." As murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd, Finn suddenly called out from a nearby rise, "Everyone, you need to see this." The army crested the hill and collectively held their breath. Before them, in a valley of shadow and flame, stood their destination, the sorcerer's lair. It was a citadel of impossible geometry, towers of black stone spiraling into a sky choked with roiling storm clouds. A vortex of pure darkness surrounded the fortress, creating a barrier that pulsed with eldritch energy. "By all the gods," Grimclaw whispered, his usual bravado faltering at the sight. Lyra's keen eyes scanned the defenses. "It's heavily fortified. And that magical barrier, I've never seen anything like it." Garrick's jaw was set in grim determination. This is what we came for. The final confrontation. The chance to end the sorcerer's reign of terror once and for all. Thicket stepped forward, his massive form silhouetted against the hellish landscape before them. The curse pulled at him stronger than ever, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on the bonds he'd formed, the trust placed in him by monsters and surface dwellers alike. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying to every member of their battered but unbroken army. "Before us lies the culmination of our journey. In that fortress waits an evil that has plagued this land for centuries. An evil that twisted some of us into monsters, that shattered lives and devoured hope." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, human, elf, dwarf, goblin, troll, and creatures that defied classification, all united in purpose. But look at what that evil has wrought instead. It sought to divide us, to turn us against one another. And yet here we stand, united. Former enemies, now brothers and sisters in arms. We carry within us a power the sorcerer cannot comprehend, the power of redemption, of forgiveness, of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. A cheer went up from the army, weapons raised in defiance of the looming citadel. "The path ahead will not be easy," Thicket continued. "The sorcerer has indeed made pacts with dark powers. We will face challenges beyond our worst nightmares, but we face them together, and together there is nothing we cannot overcome." As Thicket's words faded, a sense of grim determination settled over the army. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever horrors awaited them in the sorcerer's lair, they would face them as one. Lyra stepped up beside Thicket, her bow at the ready. Garrick flanked his other side, holy sword gleaming. Finn, Grimclaw, Whisper, and countless others fell into formation behind them. For redemption, Thicket growled. For freedom, Lyra added. And for a future without fear, Garrick declared. And with that, the unlikely army began their descent into the valley, towards the final confrontation that would determine the fate of the dungeon, the surface world, and perhaps reality itself. The Sorcerer's citadel loomed before them, a challenge and a promise. Within its twisted walls lay either glorious victory or utter destruction. But whatever the outcome, the united force of former monsters and surface dwellers had already achieved something remarkable. They had proven that even in the darkest of places, hope could flourish, and the bonds of friendship could overcome centuries of hatred and fear. Thank you so very much for listening to this story. I thoroughly hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, leave a like, and comment too. I hope to see you on the next adventure.